Okay. All right, we'll call the meeting to order, the July 15th, 2020 meeting of the 2020 Charter Review Committee. And as our tradition suggests, we would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance at this time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Cresser, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Berquist?
Present.
Ms. Castillo?
Present.
Mrs. Corso?
Present.
Mrs. Guerra? Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Cresser?
Here.
Mr. Lamarca?
Present.
Mr. Mack?
Here.
Mr. Meredith?
Here.
Mr. Milkey?
Here.
Ms. Murray?
Here.
Ms. Sortino? Mr. Whalen? And Mrs. Yandel?
Here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next, we have on the agenda approval of the minutes. The July 6, 2020 meeting minutes were prepared and circulated in advance of this meeting. And so we'll, at this point, entertain any questions, comments, or corrections.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to approve the minutes.
Okay, well, motion to approve by Mr. Berquist. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Meredith. All those in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Opposed?
Yes.
Okay, opposed? Okay, those are passed. Thank you. Next is audience participation. And Mrs. Cresser, as I understand it, we did have a submittal that needs to be read into the record.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Did receive an email from Tim Schwanger. The following comment: I have been following Sandusky government actions for 33 plus years, including participating in a number of City of Sandusky committees as a member. Please accept and take into consideration the following comments. Regarding Section 2, form of government, changing to a ward form of government has been a hot topic in Sandusky for 15 plus years. Please note there are a number of area cities with the ward system with a lesser population than Sandusky. The Charter Review Committee should forward to the City Commission the issue to place the ward system on the ballot and allow residents to decide. Regarding Section 4 qualifications, the 3-year residency regulation has been standard in the Charter for several years. 3 years allows for a new resident to get acclimated to their new job in the community, their new home in the community, and the intricate details of how Sandusky's government operates. Dropping the requirement to 18 months does not allow time to become acclimated to one's other obligations. There appears to be interest from 1 or 2 Charter Review members considering running for City Commission in the next election who do not meet the 3-year residency requirement. Regarding Section 14, the sale of public property and use of Section 14 has not been discussed by this committee. Please thoroughly discuss adding to Section 14, quote, sale or lease of public parks, piers, and plazas shall not be passed under the emergency clause of Section 14. And regarding Section 25, expenditures, the jump in expenditures allowed without first moving to the City Commission for approval from $10,000 to $50,000 is extremely excessive. Sandusky residents have a right to be able to examine how the City Manager and City Commission is spending tax dollars. Currently, public examination of expenditures is through City Commission agendas and City Commission minutes. Jumping to $50,000 will create difficulty for residents to track how money is spent. That was all.
Okay, thank you for that. That will be put into the record of the meeting and available for review by others who might look at our recommendations and so forth. So, thank you. Okay, so that takes us to why are we here tonight? And so I think just to set it up procedurally, what we did at the last meeting, the July 6th, we confirmed that we had all our information and that we've had all the debate that was necessary, and then we marched through each provision of the charter, and those that we were not recommending changes for and those that we were recommending changes for. We had motions and debates and adopted those recommendations, and then so what we said is we were going to come back here tonight to review a letter setting forth those recommendations. And so what we're here to do is to adopt the letter and to indicate that it accurately reflects the motions that were passed at the last meeting. And so that's why we're here tonight, is to reflect on the accuracy of that letter as it relates to the votes that have already been taken after we closed debate on the issue. In the interim period of time, there has been some additional information that has been submitted to the committee. Ms. Castillo sent an email on July 7th related to commission qualifications or disclosures around running for commission. And then Mr. Lamarca, also another committee member, submitted information to the committee on July 13th, July 14th, and July 15th related to section 17 and 18, which is a reporting relationship between the law director and the finance director and the city manager, and also section 25, which is the competitive bidding threshold and the need for a commission vote to authorize the expenditure. And finally, we received an email as well from Chief Wilcox of our fire department dated July 15th related to the offices or the rank that would be eligible to apply under civil service for the chief position, requesting the withdrawal of the amendment of officers of all ranks, including fire marshal, lieutenant, and captains, and reverting to the original language that allowed the position of captain or higher. And so that information has been submitted in the meantime, and so I just that record, it will be, I think, should be submitted as part of the record as well, given that the information was submitted by committee members and also by one of the staff members who had provided us information. And so with that, that would complete that record of information, and that record then would be passed on to the city commission along with the version of whatever that sets forth a recommendation, the letter that we're here to look at tonight, and sign, and that group of information then would be passed on and would be available to the city commission for its use when it was reviewing our recommendations, so that it would have the full picture, including the additional information that was submitted after debate was closed. And so I think that's the state of the record right now. And so from a procedural perspective, if there is a desire of this body to reopen debate on any one of those topics, section 17, 18, 25, or just section 27 in the civil service, what would be required is that there would be a motion and a second to reopen the debate first, and then there would be a requirement for a majority vote of this body, which we've defined as 8 votes, to reopen debate. If that vote is, if that debate is reopened, then we will take in information and we will debate the topic, and then it would then require us to have a vote to amend whatever recommendation was at play. And again, that would require a second and then a majority vote, again, of this body, which would be eight people. And so that's the process that I think we need to follow here tonight. And so I'll stop there and ask for any questions or comments on the process as I've outlined it.
Mr. Chairman, do we have a quorum Because I'm not counting enough faces here, I can't tell how many are online.
I think there's 11.
Okay,
Mrs. Cresser, is that correct?
There's actually 13. Mrs. Guerra and Ms. Sortino both joined a couple minutes after 5 o'clock. So we're only missing one person.
Okay, great.
thank you.
All right, yes. So, I guess then I would, if there's no questions on that, then I would ask, are there any questions, corrections, additions to the recommendation, the draft recommendation, which was circulated in advance of the meeting, setting forth the recommendations of this body as voted on July 6th, which includes Section 4, the qualifications for running for city commissioner, which is we recommended considering changing the required minimum residency for city commission candidates from 3 years to 18 months. Section 6, salary and bonds, where we recommend consider increasing the salary for city commissioner to be commensurate with the state of Ohio Public Employees Retirement System minimum for eligibility in PERS. Section 16, price and mode of publication, consider changing the requirement of publishing legislation in the newspaper by title only and adding a requirement to provide online notification and by posting in public places as designated by the city commission. Section 25, expenditures, consider raising the threshold for competitive bidding to $50,000 and raise the threshold for expenditures requiring legislation to $50,000. And Section 27, civil service, considering editing this section of the charter to require 10 out of 12 years of active service to be considered for the position of fire chief or police chief. Additionally, add the titles of lieutenant captain or fire marshal or their equivalent for appointment to the position of fire chief. Add the title of sergeant or its equivalent to be considered for appointment to the position of police chief. And so those are the 5 recommendations that we've made. And beneath each one was a synopsis of the flavor of the discussion. And so I would open the floor up for comment, questions, or any suggested changes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Alex Jones. I'd like to, I think this seems like the no-brainer. Let's just start with Section 27, the civil service. And if we just want to make a motion about it right now, we can, but just adopt whatever Chief Wilcox's changes were to that section.
Okay, so to keep with procedure, if we want to do that, the first thing would be to reopen, because these are final. This is only, we're only looking to say, does this reflect what we said?
Right.
If we want to change what we said, then we got to reopen debate. So are you making a motion?
I would like to make a motion to reopen that debate, yes, thank you.
On Section 27.
On Section 27.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a second, okay. We've got a motion to reopen debate on Section 27 of the Civil Service section, the recommendation that we've made. Mrs. Cresser, can you call the roll?
Mr. Berquist,
Yes.
Ms. Castile,
Yes.
Mrs. Corso,
Yes.
Mrs. Guerra,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Cresser,
Yes.
Mr. Lamarca,
Yes.
Mr. Mack,
Yes.
Mr. Meredith,
Yes.
Mr. Melky,
Yes.
Ms. Murray, is muted, Mrs. Sortino,
Yes.
and Mrs. Yandel. Yes.
Okay, the debate is now open. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Okay, so I'm looking at the email that was circulated prior to this meeting. I don't know, do we want to discuss, or we just want to make a motion to amend? Does it need discussion? I'm asking.
I mean, why don't you just set forth what he's setting forth so that we've got it on the table?
The email stated that, quote, after deep discussions with members of the department regarding Section 27, I'd like to recommend the following. I'm requesting the withdrawal of the recent amendment for allowance of officers of all ranks fire marshal, lieutenants, and captains to be eligible to test or apply for the chief position, and revert to the original language that allowed the position of captain or higher to be considered for the position of fire chief. If that's the expert's opinion, I would certainly side with his professional opinion on it. So it seems like a no-brainer to me to amend that to reflect the chief's wishes.
Okay, does anyone have any comments or questions?
I'd like to know why he amended that.
Okay, I think Chief Wilcox is available, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's to you, Mr. Chairman. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Well, with this piece, it was brought to me by some of the leadership, the question of experience and being able to been in a position of leadership in terms of the captain rank, which is in our department. Our captains or shift commanders are the ones that run the day to day. In other departments, they may have similar type of structure and or higher, which would be battalion chiefs, assistant chiefs, or even chiefs. In the spirit of trying to keep the confidence of the firefighters and the choices that we make in terms of leadership for the department moving forward, they didn't want to see the change. They made an argument that was compelling. I concurred, and it was quite simple as that. And that's why we made the change.
Okay, Mrs. Corso?
Does that apply to the police department also, or just the fire department?
I think this is just the fire chief. So it's
Just
only
the fire department, ma'am.
Okay, so how
Only
would
the
we
fire
do
department.
that?
We
You have to
can,
just,
I can see how we can kind of amend this to make that happen. But I do have a question. When we debated this the last time, one of the overriding issues that we were talking about is we wanted to make sure that we had a broad pool of candidates. And this while I appreciate the rank and file wanting to understand who their leaders and make sure there's confidence in their leaders, I think the point we made the last time we discussed this was just to get in the pool of candidates. This didn't mean that the person we were going to select them. It was just a broader spectrum from people from which we could select. And isn't that additive to the process? And wouldn't the rank and file have an ability to kind of have their viewpoints known in that, as opposed to kind of permanently limiting those who would be in the pool for election or for selection? I guess, Chief, I'm directing that at you.
Okay, could you repeat it again?
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is that the last time when we talked about this, and I thought we had a great discussion about how the need to broaden the pool so that we have a wide range of candidates to select from, and that was important to have a competitive process. And that this change to go back does not achieve that goal. And while I certainly am respectful of the input of the firemen, and in terms of selecting the leadership in that department, I'm wondering if we're not undoing something that was beneficial to the process of selection and not actually the selection itself.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chairman. The intent and the spirit was there. That was then the intent. But the argument on the opposite side, that was illustrated by some of the leadership, was that in the past, chief selection is such in my process that they believe they achieved that with the number of candidates that applied for the position, with the qualifications that already pre-existed. So once we sat down and had the discussion and we went back and forth, and especially from my perspective with the intent of initiating this, my concern was to make sure that we had at least a representation, independent of just that rank, to be selected that still have an ability to convey the culture that has already been established by members that were already there outside of the captain's rank. However, the argument that was made was that wasn't a concern, but the concern was simply about the leadership and the experience of that leadership, and the ranking of it. So once we settled on that, then the decision was made to go forward with the recommendation that I sent to you this morning.
Okay. Thank you. Does that generate any additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, Tom LaMarca.
Yes.
I think that in taking language out that we have suggested is still squeezing others out of the process, because we talked about the different rankings of firemen from other departments across the country. And if we revert it back to what the chief or company has suggested, then we're losing that pool of potential applicants.
Well, and so along those lines, we're just to center ourselves again, because it's easy to kind of get caught up in the individual debate on this. We're making a recommendation to the city commission to consider whether or not these things should be put on a ballot that the voters of the community will vote on to change. And so in that regard, we're basically saying, should we broaden the process? Is that a question that we would suggest to the city commission ought to be asked to the community in the sense of this particular process under Section 27? That's what we said before based on what we heard. And so just want to flesh it out where that's at, and go back to what our task is to make a recommendation to the commission that then they decide what would go on the ballot and what the voters would ultimately see. And so, I think that point is well taken. So yes, Mrs. Corso.
I'm just curious if Chief Orzech has had any comment on this.
If Chief Orzech's on, please weigh in.
He is not on this call this evening. Mr. Hayberger is. Chief Orzech is not.
Yes, I talked with the chief, with Chief Orzech. Obviously, he wants his to go forward the way the committee has recommended. I don't think he had any opposition to, excuse me, to Chief Wilcox's suggestion.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Kirk Kresser.
Yes.
I say we make the recommendation as is and move forward. If the commission does pass it and we come down to a point in the future where they're going to hire a new fire chief, I think the system will play out itself, whether you're qualified or not at that point. So I would say leave it as is, personally.
Okay. Other comments, questions, observations? Okay, if not, then we've reopened debate. We've been able to discuss it, and as it stands now, in the absence of a motion and a second to amend it, the provision as included in here would stand. We would not amend it. We'll still go back and make sure that we approve all the language in there. But as far as this issue goes, debate, we've had the debate. Is there anybody that wants to make a motion to change the recommendation that we adopted at our last meeting with regard to Section 27 civil service? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to with that issue. Thank you for raising that issue. I think it was important to hear what had to be said on that. So then that would take us back to the what we were discussing, which is the letter of recommendation. And I already kind of read through the 5 recommendations, the titles that we were looking at. And so I'll entertain any comments, questions, additions, corrections to that letter.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I may have missed
Mr.
something.
LaMarca.
So my question is this the time in which you would like me to make my motion to reopen for discussion sections 17, 18, and 25?
You can.
Well then, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to do just that. Further discuss sections 17, 18, and 25 as they relate to the law director, finance director being appointed and working at the pleasure of the city manager.
Okay. So we have a motion, and let's take a motion to reopen section 17, the debate on section 17, section 18, and section 25. I think section 17 and 18 are related, and we could entertain a motion on those together. And then we would also entertain a motion on section 25, because that's a slightly different, if that's okay.
I agree.
All right, so is there a second to reopen debate on section 17 and 18?
Mr. Chairman, I'll secretary Jeff Berquist.
Okay, we have a second by Mr. Berquist. Mrs. Cresser, will you call the roll?
Mr. Berquist,
Yes?
Ms. Castile, Mrs. Corso,
Yes.
Mrs. Guerra,
Yes.
Mr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Cresser,
Yes.
Mr. Lamarca,
Yes.
Mr. Mack,
Yes.
Mr. Meredith,
No.
Mr. Milky,
No.
Ms. Murray,
No.
Ms. Sortino,
No.
and Mrs. Yandel.
No. Ms. Cresser, this is Jade. I'm sorry my phone stuck my mute button, but my vote is no.
Okay, so the vote was 7 to 4, 5, 6.
So it did not receive 8 votes?
Correct.
Okay, so we will not reopen debate on that issue. Section 25, we have a motion to reopen debate on section 25. Is there a second?
Second. Jeff
Second,
Berquist.
Mr. Berquist has seconded it. Mrs. Cresser, will you call the roll on the motion to reopen debate on section 25?
Mr. Berquist,
Yes?
Ms. Castile,
No.
Mrs. Corso,
Yes.
Mrs. Guerra,
No.
Mr. Jones,
No.
Mr. Cresser,
No.
Mr. Lamarca,
Yes.
Mr. Mack,
No.
Mr. Meredith,
No.
Mr. Milky,
No.
Ms. Murray,
No.
Ms. Sortino,
No.
Mrs. Yandel,
No.
And the tally?
The vote was 3 to 10 to not reopen section 25.
Okay, so we will not reopen debate on that issue. Okay, so where does that leave us? So now we're back to going over the recommendations and the accuracy of this letter as setting forth the recommendations that were voted on and approved by this body in the July 6th meeting. And I also might note here, just to not bear repeating, that the information that's been submitted and the viewpoints that have been submitted by the committee members via email, including the fire chief's email, will all be part of the record. And as our recommendation goes forward, the city commission will have the benefit of those thoughts as it reviews. But what we're looking at here is, does this accurately reflect what we've approved at the last meeting? And so I think that bears repeating to get us back and centered on this. And so I'll open the floor again for any comments or debates on how whether this letter of recommendation, it accurately reflects the vote of this body at the July 6th meeting. Are there any additional comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the letter of recommendation as submitted and circulated in advance of this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Jones made the motion, Mr. Meredith seconded. Mrs. Cresser, will you call the roll?
I'm sorry, can you repeat who seconded it?
Mr. Meredith?
Thank you. Mr. Berquist?
Yes.
Ms. Castile?
Yes.
Mrs. Corso?
Yes.
Mrs. Guerra?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Cresser?
Yes.
Mr. Lamarca?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Meredith?
Yes.
Mr. Melky?
Yes.
Ms. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Sortino?
Yes.
Mrs. Yandel?
Yes.
Okay. That motion is passed. And so from a process perspective, Mrs. Cresser has asked that this letter needs to be signed by each of us, and the ones that are here, I think the signature page will be brought down for us to sign. Is that correct, Mrs. Cresser?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And so that brings us to old business and new business. Our charge was to make review and then make recommendations to the city commission. It appears that we have achieved that goal. I would, in kind of just as closing remarks, thank Mrs. Cresser for the coordination and organization of this, and our other colleagues on the staff who have made this work in a hard situation where we've had to be on the Zoom or life size or whatever it is, and then been able to work through this. Lots of things have happened in the world while we were going through this, but we were able to move forward. I think thanks to the committee members for participation in this. You know, it is an honor to be asked to do this by the city and to think about what our constitution for the city is and what it means for the future of the city. And so on behalf of the city, I would express the gratitude and thank you to this group for spending time over the last several weeks accomplishing this goal. And so I will ask, are there any comments for the good of the order?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment.
Yes.
I've sat on a lot of review boards and a lot of strategic things. You have done an excellent job through all of this chaos of moving us forward and keeping us on track.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And so with that, I think I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting and this committee.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second the move.
Mr. Meredith moved and Mr. Lamarca seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.